I think overall what I found is that burnout comes for two reasons. You've got the personal side of things. And when you think about people in product where we're like, I love working in a fast-paced environment where I thrive among stress. You've also got the organizational side of things where there's targets to meet. You've got a startup that needs to make sure they're making cash. So you've got the organizational pressure combined with these people that have taken a job because they want to grow, they want to develop, they want to drive things forwards. And when you put those two things together, you basically create an environment for burnout. So in terms of how we tackle it, I don't think one necessarily, if you have one of those elements, like you're a high-driven person, but your environment is perfectly set up for that and there's a safe space and you don't feel like you need to go all of the time, maybe you wouldn't burn out. If you're not a high-driven person and you're in this chaotic environment, you might still burn out anyway because you can't handle that environmental space. So we really have to look at both sides of those things in terms of thinking about where to tackle it from.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Darin, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product growth and senior leadership topics. Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest at the tea is like the Marie Kondo of product chaos, except instead of folding your socks, she's here to set your toxic sprint rituals on fire. She's a product consultant, burnout slayer, and the woman who turned Booking.com's move fast and break things mantra into move smart and don't break your soul while doing it. This woman doesn't just talk about burnout, she's out here collecting the receipts for it. After her own stint at Booking.com left her crispy fried, she spent 10 months unraveling why 92% of PMs are either burnt out or teetering on the edge. And no, just meditate more is not exactly what she's suggesting. It's also not the PM's fault. It's the cult of hustle porn and leaders who think ASAP is a personality trait. So what is her solution? Treating burnout like a product problem? Maybe, because if 72% of your users churned, you would not blame the users. You'd fix the damn product. So if you're tired of crushing it, meaning literally being crushed, stick around. She's dropping truth bombs on why perfectionism is overrated, how to say no without getting fired, and why your CEO's urgent request probably isn't that urgent. Let's go, and welcome to the Product Tea, Evie Brockwell. How are you doing this morning?
I'm really good, thank you, and thank you for having me.
I'm very glad that you're here. I just said, how are you doing this morning? It is not morning, in fact. It is a very late afternoon. We have to soon go to bed because you're in London and I'm in Switzerland. Would you like to add anything to this intro, or was this a complete description of your personality?
Yeah, I think that's my work personality in a nutshell. I think you've basically described what I went from being to who I am now. So one of the best intros I've had. I have to say it's quite catchy. This is going to be my blurb that I send out to everyone from now on.
Yeah, not the first time I'm hearing that. So my LLM is working in overtime. So Evie, what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
I think the biggest thing, if you had to ask someone that actually knows me, is that on the surface, everyone thinks I'm this like really bubbly, happy person all of the time. And like that is true. That's an element of who I am. And I very much live in alignment. But I think most people don't see the work that goes on behind the scenes for that to happen. So once people truly get to know me, they realize that there's a lot of self-care and a lot of work to bring this personality to life on things like this podcast.
So what you're saying is, in order to be a bubbly and happy personality, you need to go through a lot of pain in the background. Is that what you're saying? Like, is it a curated image? Is that what you're trying to say?
I think everyone's different. I don't think everyone has to go through as much, but I've met a lot of product people that go, I just think I'm one of those people that always needs to do the work. And I'm like, yep, you're not the only person. I think a lot of us feel that way. So yeah, kind of curated, but in a way that serves me. So that's all good.
Okay. Well, let's roll that into the topic, because I have an inkling on what you're going to say about the next question. Is there anything that you're afraid of personally or professionally right now?
Yeah. So I'm currently going through a huge transition phase of life. I left corporate 4 years ago, started coaching and consultancy, and traveled the world at the same time, which was amazing. And at that point in time, all of my values were things like, I want freedom, I want adventure, I want growth, I want new things. And then in the last year, I started to be like, maybe I actually want stability and I want to actually build something and have more long-term purpose. And that means that I'm thinking about, should I actually move back to a full-time 9 to 5? And then with that comes that fear of going, well, could I do that and still have the lifestyle that I want? Could I do that and make sure I don't burn out again? Could I do that and make sure that I'm still living in an authentic and happy way? So these are all of the things that I think keep me up at night, basically. It's like everyone has stress, and that's my current stress.
You're having stress that you don't know whether you should go back to a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah, and where I should live in the world and a lot more. But I think they're massive life shifts, and we don't always give ourselves credit for how impactful that is on the way that we think.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. So you wrote me an email about 5 months ago. It must have been around Christmas time, where you were asking me whether we should talk about burnout. Why do you care so much about burnout, specifically as a topic with product managers? Because I have not met a single product manager in my life ever that has been stressed. Not a single one. So who are you meeting here?
I need to work on your teams.
No, I'm just ignorant. No. I'm going to talk about it soon. But tell me, so why do you care so much about this topic?
So obviously personal experience. I've been through this myself and come out of the other side of it. But then there's also the element of when I started coaching, I had about 50% of people that I was coaching come to me and say, hey, I really want to be amazing at product, but I just don't see how I can do this without hitting rock bottom, being stressed all the time and feeling burnt out. And I was like, okay, that number seems quite high. Maybe I should look into this. So that's when I went and did a bunch of research and found that actually the number of people in product that have either burnt out or felt like they were close to it is actually 92% of people, which is huge. And I think it's not just a product thing. I think working in the tech space also leads to this. But it's definitely something that people haven't had the tools or the awareness to know that there is something that they can do about this and they can work in a more effective way. I think when product spun up as a career, it was just do more, break things, move faster. And if you couldn't keep up with that, you felt like you wouldn't be successful. And I think and hope that we're starting to go through a transition phase where people are realizing that we can't keep going the way that we did and we can actually do things in a more sustainable, smarter way. There's a lot more that goes into it in terms of why people are burnt out, but it's something that I'm really passionate about making sure that people have the awareness for. And I think the more we can have these conversations, we create that awareness, but also learn what they can do to actually do something about it.
Do you really think it is an awareness problem or more of a corporate culture problem, in the sense that you're not allowed to say that you're burnt out or that you're just tired because you're fearing oh, if I say that, I'm going to get fired, or, I'm having some kind of disadvantages compared to people who do not?
Yeah. So there was another report from the Product Academy, and they found that I think it was 48% of people still thought it was a taboo topic. So there is still a large amount of people that think, actually, we shouldn't talk about this. So I think both of those go hand in hand. The more people that are having those conversations and raising that awareness and saying it's okay to talk about this, the more we should hopefully break that corporate mold of thinking that basically, if you're feeling stressed, that you can't hack it and therefore you either shouldn't be doing that job or you might get fired. Because I really haven't ever seen a scenario where that's true. It's usually that there's other things at play, and it's not that you're bad at your job. It is just the fact that the systems aren't set up in the right way, or maybe you have got a toxic boss, maybe you need to change environments, or maybe the stuff that you need to work on personally. So there's always ways to overcome it, which I think is the next part beyond just the awareness.
Okay, so what should we do about it?
Great question. There's loads that I can dig into here. And I think overall, what I found is that burnout comes for two reasons. You've got the personal side of things. And when you think about people in product, where we're like, I love working in a fast-paced environment where I thrive among stress. You've also got the organizational side of things where there's targets to meet. You've got a startup that needs to make sure they're making cash. So you've got the organizational pressure combined with these people that have taken a job because they want to grow, they want to develop, they want to drive things forwards. And when you put those two things together, you basically create an environment for burnout. So in terms of how we tackle it, I don't think one necessarily, if you have one of those elements, like you're a high-driven person, but your environment is perfectly set up for that, and there's a safe space, and you don't feel like you need to go all of the time, maybe you wouldn't burn out. If you're not a high-driven person and you're in this chaotic environment, you might still burn out anyway because you can't handle that environmental space. So we really have to look at both sides of those things in terms of thinking about where to tackle it from. So yeah, which one would you like me to dive into first?
I mean, it depends a little bit on what you think is what we can exert control more over, right? So in the sense that it's one thing to kind of realize that there is a problem. And I do think there is a problem, but I don't think it's that people are unaware that they have a burnout. It's just that nobody really realizes how many people are actually having trouble at their work. And then everybody's in the room pretending that everybody's kind of fine. And then everybody's like, okay, I'm the odd one out, right? But let's attack it from any angle that you want to.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that's fair. I think the awareness part that people don't necessarily realize is that they can change it or that they don't have to keep going like that for the rest of their career to be successful. So it's like the more people you can see where you go, oh, well, that's what that person did, or that's what that person did, or this person's been through this, I think the better. So yeah, the part that you can exert more control over is usually the personal side of things. You can obviously change organizations, but we all know with the job market as it is, that is not the advice that anyone needs or wants to hear. I think there's a lot of people that are in scenarios where they think, actually, it's safer to stay where I am or I just can't find anything else. So especially given that, it's like, okay, well, what can you work on yourself? And a lot of that comes from the awareness piece of knowing what your own triggers are. Because yes, I can list off all of the things that are like, here are the main reasons why people burn out, but each individual is different. And some of the main things that happen for people is it's not that it's a case of, oh, I'm working so hard and I'm taking on more and I'm doing more, but it's usually a disconnect between feeling like you're working really hard. And I can say this was true for me in my case. I felt like I was giving everything my all. I was like waking up at 7 to make sure I work and I wasn't logging off until 10 p.m. And that's fine. And I was like, quote unquote, happy to do this. But then as soon as you get absolutely bollocked for one thing slipping in the net when you're trying to lead so many different projects at once, then that's when you feel that disconnect where you don't feel like you're valued. And that's what a lot of product people say happens to them. And like, that's where they struggle. So first of all, becoming aware of, right, I've been through this week and these were all of the things that triggered me, that made me feel like I was really stressed. And these are the reasons why I think that happened. Then you can start to look at whether you can reduce some of those triggers to stop those things coming to you, or if you can expand your capacity to handle those and not let them impact you as much.
So I think, especially to this point, I'm curious because the CEOs of, like, what do we call them? Like, we call product managers always like the CEOs of their product or whatever. You know, like this bullshit phrase that everybody's kind of telling us through our career. And I think an actual good description where this applies is that the CEO is usually the person that gets all the leftover problems that really suck in a company. So in that sense, I kind of agree, because that's usually what we have to do. So if that is true, like, if the PMs are usually the ones that have to deal with everything that nobody else wants to deal with, right? So like when it comes to like shipping a product. So if we do not really have too much choice about what we do during the day, so how can we reduce it? Or like, how would you approach this in that sense?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily, well, it can be the amount of work you have to do. And I think there's always stuff we can reduce. And it's like, even with AI now, there's ways that people can improve things and speed things up. But a tendency that I've noticed from so many product people is that they're so used to being busy that if they're not busy, if their diary isn't at maximum capacity, if it's not full of meetings, then they feel like they're not being productive and they're not achieving things. So I actually think there is so much that can be reduced, and it's more of that mental block to be able to push back and say, actually, this thing isn't important, or I'm not going to focus on this now, that people don't feel like they can do. So I'm always like, as soon as we talk about burnout, this can go in so many directions, but I think that there's a lot of underlying stuff there that people need to be able to go away and tackle, which is, okay, why do I feel like I can't say no to things? Why don't I feel like I can push back? And so much of that comes from people-pleasing tendencies or feeling like people need to be perfect at their job, which often comes from things and patterns that have been created from childhood that we then extend throughout our lives and believe that's true when we get into work. So yes, there's a lot of stuff that has to be done in the product space, and that product role could always be busy, but being discerning about where to spend your time and energy and what you enjoy and don't enjoy is one part of it. And then the other part of it, when I talk about triggers, isn't necessarily doing less work, but your triggers might be that your boss messaged you at 6 p.m. and you already said you were going to log off for that evening, but you feel really nervous and you feel like you need to respond straight away. It might be that someone asked you to do something and you really wanted to say no, but you said yes, and then you created extra stress for yourself. It might be that you just don't like the way that you had a conversation with someone and that one-to-one interaction was quite aggressive towards you. For example, like I was working with someone last year and their CEO would come in and yell at everyone each time they'd have a meeting. So like once a week, they're getting absolutely bollocked and shouted at. And then they're taking on that emotional strain and that emotional impact, and that's leading to burnout. So the triggers aren't always doing more things, but it's sometimes specific scenarios that happen at work that bring certain things up for you that lead you to feel higher stress.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And if I'm just translating this into what I think about it, and you just tell me whether this is more or less correct, it's not really helpful to say like, hey, you need to care less, right? It's like the things that we are stressed about, specifically me as well. Like I know that when I read a message at 10 o'clock in the evening that is really stressful from work, I cannot go to sleep for the next 4 hours. It's just how it is. That's just how I am. right? Like I care about these things. They piss me off genuinely. That's, that's just what it is. I did notice though as well, like as a leader myself, or like as a manager, for lack of a better word, I am sometimes not better than that, right? So like I do send messages sometimes like at 8 or 9 o'clock, and then I'm thinking like, hey guys, you don't need to answer now, please don't, right? But like these people are also doing the same. So we're kind of, there's two sides of the same coin in a way, right?
Yeah, and I was the same. Like that's how I preferred to work, was like, let me send these messages when everyone else is offline because it's quiet and I can actually get this done. Or like my brain's just thought about this thing, so I'm going to send it so it doesn't stay in my mind. And obviously now it's like I try and make more of a conscious effort that I make sure I schedule emails to go out the next morning so it doesn't come through at 10 p.m. So there are small techniques that we can do like that as leaders, which can help. But then as an individual, you also have to know those things about yourself and be able to set those boundaries to say, well, actually, like I do turn my Slack notifications off automatically at 5 o'clock. And if you don't feel like you can do that because you feel like you're in one of these environments where you need to respond and you always need to be on, you really have to challenge yourself and question whether that's a personal trait where you are a people pleaser, or if it is something from the organization where that expectation is there from your leaders, and therefore like the way that you'd manage that would change.
So I have a difficult challenge for you. I'm not sure where this is going, but like I had a couple of difficult PMs as well in my career where I was starting to notice that they were trying to set up boundaries, but they didn't really know how to do that. And basically what that sounded like is you're starting to get pushback on really random stuff where it's really not appropriate to set boundaries. Like, and sort of like, no, I don't want to do that. And I'm like, that's not like how you should set boundaries, right? Like, it's like, I know it stresses you out. It also stresses me out, this kind of stuff, but like someone has to do it. So can you maybe touch a little bit more specifically on this as well? Like, so what do you mean in terms of like boundaries? Because this is a thing that also annoys me as a grown-up woman in my life otherwise as well. Like, so what are healthy boundaries? Maybe that's a better phrasing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's like, I totally feel you. It's like, we can't all just start turning around, throwing our toys out the pram and being like, I don't want to do that. It's like, no, that's your job. Like you have to do that. So finding that balance is key. I think the step that comes before that, and this is where it can be more difficult for some people, is that you need to be able to have that conversation with the person that you're reporting into to say, hey, these are all of the things that are stressing me out. Or these are the things that I think are leading me to do less productive work because I'm feeling this way about it. And I'm being more reactive than being able to do things in the way that I would like. And if you can start to phrase things in that way about what the benefit is of you making some shifts and making some changes, then for the most part, someone receiving that can be responsive and be like, okay, I can see how this could be a positive thing. And then it's finding that balance between what can those boundaries actually look like that are, like you say, healthy and sustainable and actually work for you and the organization. Like I always say, I don't do this work for PMs to be like, I'm not going to do anything that I don't like anymore. I'm going to do way less. For the most part, most of the people that I work with in product really care. And like their issues is that they care too much and they need to find like what the right things are that they should and shouldn't care about. So I think by starting to have that conversation more as a two-way, like I want you to support me with this because this might lead to this better outcome. What would be beneficial to you and how can we set something that would work? Then you've created that understanding between two people. Someone knows why you're doing it. So it's not just this random pushback. And you're being able to find things that go, okay, I can deliver the right value to the organization, but I don't have to reply to messages at 8 p.m. and everyone knows I'm not going to. So the expectation is there that they'll get a response the next morning. So the more that you can have that transparency, the better. But like I say, sometimes you don't feel like you're in relationships where you can do that. And that's where it gets more challenging.
You know, I remember a couple of specific people who were notorious in working overtime. Like, you know, exactly those that you said, you know, like they suck at setting boundaries. And I might send one of them this particular episode so he's really listening close to about what I'm going to say. Because I also banned him from the office at some point. I said that after 6 o'clock, you're not allowed to be in this office anymore. I'm going to throw you actually out. I'm sick and tired of it, right? So that he took his laptop and he worked from home. But in any case, so the thing is, I think one of the difficulties of this is that we can say that. And that's kind of fine. But we still celebrate in company meetings, in anything that we do, we sort of still celebrate this behavior a little bit. And I think, you know, it's like these odd sentences that you hear sometimes of, oh, look, I don't know, I'm just going to give him a name, Peter. Look, Peter over there, you know, he's always working hard, you know, like he's always like behind everything, right? Like he cares so much and everything, and our round of applause and everything. So we're kind of celebrating it, right? And I think that's what's so backward around it. And I always kind of tried sometimes a little bit more successful, sometimes a little bit less, to kind of more punish that behavior in a positive way, right? Like punish in the sense of like, hey, I actually do not think this is a good thing that you're doing, because what you're doing is you're masking resource constraints that we have. You're masking all sorts of things. And what I definitely do not need is you burning out. And I think let's just assume that this is the right way to handle it, but maybe you can grade my performance in this regard. But like, that's how I'm thinking about it, because I think one of the things that's really rotten in the system is that we're celebrating this behavior in weird ways still by just celebrating like how hard people work.
Yeah, and it's true. And I think that sometimes we do need and want that. Sometimes we do want a product team to be able to go and do a sprint and get something over the line because we've got a launch date or we've got marketing campaigns going out at a certain time, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, I don't think anyone as a leader would ever sit and listen to this and be like, I want all of my product teams to go home at 5 p.m. because I know it's better for them, because it's not the case. But recognizing that actually, if you keep someone performing like that all of the time, that you will lose them either to another company or they won't be the best version of themselves. That's the first step as a leader. So in terms of what you've done there, I'm like, yeah, spot on. That's how it should be. And then, like you say, you try to change someone's behavior and say, oh, well, actually, like, please make sure you go home at 6 p.m. and they still don't do that. That's not necessarily the leader's place to be able to go to the next level. But the next level is to understand, well, why are they not doing that? Is that because they want that external praise from other people and therefore they need to work on that internal validation that they're doing a good job anyway? Or we need to change some of the praise that we're giving other people to say, everyone work harder all of the time? Or is it that there's something deeper going on there where they just don't feel like they can switch off from work? And why is that? And therefore, what can you start to do to change that behavior? Like, there's always a why behind something. So the more that, again, if you can do this as a leader, if you can hold those conversations and try to dig deeper into that behavior and go down more of that coaching route, often you can find the root cause and come to a better result.
You know what? I also think that this kind of conflation of the approval that you're getting from your manager, it's so important. And I know how this feels because I was, for a big part of my professional life, the same way. Before I was able to detach it a little bit, like just like to say like, hey, you know what? I mean, it is true. We're spending a lot of time at work, but the purpose of it is not to make the employer just happy. It's you're exchanging something there, right? Like you're exchanging your time for money. That's the main transaction. But then you should also see that you're not getting worked into the ground while you're doing this, because let's be very clear about one thing. The company as a construct itself is not going to take care of you the moment you stop working for them. That is just how it is. Of course, we can have friendships and, people that we carry on with our lives and so forth. But I think it is crazy to me how much we sometimes want to use work as sort of like a replacement for, I think you said it already, right? Like for the things that did not really pan out otherwise in life, maybe, like we're trying to compensate in some really weird way. And I think that's quite annoying.
Yeah, and this came up in some of the research that I did where it was 61% of people place their identity of success more on work than anything else. And again, it's that social construct. So that is what I would expect, because that is what we've deemed to be able to say, well, work provides me with a title, it provides me with a better salary, therefore it impacts everything else in my life. And it's only when we can really take a step back and not necessarily detach ourselves, but be able to look at everything that we want to achieve in life and what our overall values of success are, that we can say, yeah, okay, work is important. But if I'm putting everything into work, like therefore I'm scoring lower on these areas and these areas. And actually, all of those factors are important to me. So therefore, how can I try to get work to be a bit more balanced with some of those things? And I think we've all been guilty of it in our early careers, that we have to learn that lesson the hard way of pushing too far and realizing that it doesn't necessarily work for us anymore, or realizing that we're sacrificing something else. And it's like, even though we're all aware of that, that's the part where we still don't really necessarily make the change until later on. And it's like, how can you start to be more intentional about that and build that earlier in a way that really does work for you?
So what else can we do? Maybe also outside of work. So like if we're just like looking at this like as a holistic thing. So you said so far that we should kind of like figure out our own triggers. This sounds a lot like therapy. I don't mean this in a bad way. So, it is very reminiscent of therapy in a sense as well. But like, what else can we do other than identifying the triggers and also setting our boundaries to kind of like analyze our own behavior?
Yeah. So a lot of it is a bit like therapy. And I think whenever I do coaching with people, they come in expecting to be like, oh, we're going to talk about product things. And then it always transfers into more of these therapy-based techniques, because actually that's what people need. They need to go beyond just being like, oh, I'm just going to make sure I log off at 5 p.m. because they've tried that and it hasn't worked.
No.
So yeah, identifying those triggers, having that awareness and doing the reflection exercise. And I know you did a podcast episode with Andy Johnson. He wrote a really good article about the window of tolerance on Lenny's podcast or Lenny's newsletter. And basically that comes down to saying, if I operate in a thriving state, if I'm at my best, which means that I'm logging off at 5 p.m., I'm maybe meditating, I'm spending time with friends, I'm spending time with family, I'm exerting XYZ behaviors, then that's when my life looks like it's going really, really well. When I start to get a bit more stressed, these are the kind of behaviors which I have, which are I potentially log off a bit later. I pick up more work. I start logging on at the weekend. I reply to emails late in the day. I stop going to the gym. I start skipping these things. And by having that view as to what life looks like when it's going really well, when you feel like you're at your best, and having that view as to what life starts to look like when you get a bit more stressed and you're pushing yourself to the edge, you can keep reflecting on that and see week after week where you're sat and if you need to change things. And like I say, like sometimes we need to go in sprints. We need to put some of that stuff aside because we've got a deadline and we've got something we need to push towards. At least if you're reflecting on that, you have that awareness and you say, okay, well, I'm sprinting now, but then I need to have some time to take a step back and recover. And that's what a lot of the time we don't do. We get used to the sprint, that stress level increases to like an 8 or 9 or 10 on your own stress scale. And then you have a bit of a rest, you have a weekend, you come down a point. So you're at 0.7 on your stress scale, and then you go again and it gets higher. And what we need to try and avoid is constantly staying in that like 8, 9, 10 state where we actually allow ourselves to feel comfortable dropping back down again a little bit. So all of those kind of awareness techniques and that constant reflection and getting to know yourself better allows you to do those things and recognize where you need to tackle the root cause to make some more long-term changes than just tackling the surface area.
So I think my main challenge to this would be as a very, I don't know, I would call myself not a severe case, but a relatively strong case on ADHD. One of the problems is not knowing what you should do. It's more like adhering to the structure itself, right? So like specifically in the evening, it is very hard to kind of switch off that phone, like to not look at your emails, that kind of thing. Do you have any advice in this regard? Like more maybe practical tips? I don't know, in any direction.
Yeah. And I'm not going to claim to be an ADHD expert, so I will definitely get your take on this afterwards in terms of what you have found has worked for you. Because I think, again, there's so many people in the product world that need that kind of advice. The things that I have found have really helped with people have been implementing it in advance. So getting things like an app blocker on your phone, which can make sure that emails are switched off after a certain time. The same with making sure your Slack messages are switched off in advance, and you don't make it a choice, it's just done. And therefore, that is part of the structure and that is part of the routine. And if you have to really challenge yourself as to whether you want to go around that to actually unlock your emails and if it's that important, and most of the time it's not. The other thing that I find a lot of people struggle with when they go to do it is the element of stretching their comfort zone. Like it feels comfortable to respond in the way that you always have, and the way that you've been doing that has made you feel safe until you realize you're stressed. And we have to really practice it. So it might be that you do it, you're like, right, okay, I'm just going to do it for a day and see that nothing bad happens. Then I can do it for another day. And now I'm going to stretch myself and see if I can do it for a week. And then before you know it, you can get up to a month. But by allowing yourself to just do it with the comfort of the safety net and knowing that you can go back if you feel like it's not working for you, can really work. And for some people, it's, okay, I'll check my emails on a Monday night, but I won't do it the rest of the week. So it's really finding those things that make it feel like it's going to be easier for you. And like I say, putting some strict structures in place beforehand that help. But yeah, would that help? Or is there anything else that you think, especially from the ADHD side, would need to be spoken about?
The nasty thing about the ADHD that I know, and there's a lot of different variants of it, like with executive dysfunction, like time, like, some people are perceiving time a little bit different than others and so forth. The really nasty thing is that you sometimes do not know that you're falling out of a habit. Mm-hmm. So a very typical thing of ADHD is that you're doing the right things. You have the app blocker. You do this, you do that, right? And then you have this huge routine. You're going to do it. And then suddenly a week later, it's not there anymore. And you never really noticed, like you're just walking past the proverbial garbage bag that is just laying in front of you. And you just you're just walking right over it. a very interesting thing that I think can work, because it's almost like being an alcoholic, right? Like, you're never going to solve this. This is not, there's no method that is kind of helping you just by getting out of like by yourself, because usually the problem with ADHD people is that they work really well under pressure. Mm-hmm. So there's a really weird kind of pull and push in this regard. So one thing that definitely does help is if you reflect with friends, specifically because you do not notice. So like, if you do have a partner or you do have someone that has some kind of influence over you in this regard, you should have continuous talks with them to talk about it. Or they tell you, so for instance, like, hey, I need to learn how to set boundaries. I need to learn how to say no. And you're one of my people in my team that we're working with each other, right? And then you're going through this exercise and you're saying like, hey, like, I want to practice this week or like this month to kind of set boundaries. Can you tell me when I'm falling out of this again? I'm not going to judge you on it, right? Like, I just need you to kind of tell me right into the face. And that is a very important thing for ADHD people, because the first 2 to 3 days, we're very, very attentive. We notice everything, but then it's just gone, right? So that's a very important one. One thing that does not work is phone apps, like putting your phone into like a minimalist phone and all that kind of thing. I did find a solution that does work for me, though. It's getting a second phone. Because I need a second phone in my bedroom because I like to listen to podcasts and then just, fall asleep with them. I have uninstalled everything there except Spotify. And that's on my nightstand, and the other phone is not allowed to come inside the room. And I think this is the extremely tough lesson that ADHD people need to learn, because we're so creative. There need to be not only boundaries, but they need to be extremely strict, extremely minimal, and extremely unflexible in the sense of, no, 5 after 9 is already a failure, right? If you say like it's 9 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock. Don't become it like 5 minutes after, 10 minutes after, 15 minutes after. It's kind of like this erosion of things. But it is always remaining kind of like a struggle, because sometimes, ADHD people, they really perform well under stress, which is kind of like a problem, right? Like, if you're taking the stress away. So
yeah. And honestly, I think there's so many good points there. And this is where I think it's so important that each person find what works for them. Because for some people, it's like, oh my God, that's genius. Like, that is absolutely what I need to do. And even for myself, it's like, I've now got a to-do list, and everything that comes first on my to-do list is like all of these good things I want to implement throughout the day. And if I'm too strict on myself, if I'm like, oh, well, I said I was going to do yoga 3 times a week and I've not done it, so there's no point at all. And it's like, no, even if you do it once, that's still a win. But by having that reminder, it's not stressful to me now. It's just like, hey, here's a gentle nudge to do it. Whereas to other people, that becomes, hey, I've got a million things to tick off, so it doesn't work. So it's like, you really have to find those things and go, yeah, okay, maybe I do just need an extra phone, or maybe I just have one space where these are the things that I'd like to do today, and I tally chart it. Like, whatever it is that works is the best thing for you. So yeah, loads of good things there. And the point on feeling the stress, I think so many people feel like that, where it's like, I need to go and be under pressure. And that's okay. But then it's like, and I'm sure you probably know this from your own experience, where you'll go, oh, right. And then sometimes I need to retreat and I need to rest. And this is what that looks like for me, so I can then go again. And if you know your own ways of working like that, again, it's not always easy because you've got the constraints of an organizational environment there. But if you can find ways to use that to your advantage, then you'll be so much more successful and have a sustainable career, as opposed to just doing it and then burning yourself out.
I think that's very important, because so I was diagnosed when I was 27, which is a long time ago, right? It's ancient times almost. And the most important insight that I got from having my own diagnosis was that there are limits to my life in how I do stuff as well, that I need to accept, but accept in a sense of, I cannot beat myself up over this all the time, because it is a part of me. I just cannot do that. So I'll give you a very specific example, which would be, I am constantly losing my parking tickets, right? This was always a discussion between me and my partner. Why did you lose the parking ticket again? Like, every time, like, we're coming back to the car, you kind of have to search through the bags and everything. And then you have people saying like, yeah, I lose it sometimes as well. I'm like, yeah, but I'm losing it every time, like that kind of stuff. So, you're absent-minded, and then, boom, it's gone. It's, I can walk around while I'm on the phone, and then the phone is gone, right? Like, there's a talent there. And this hits a little bit as well on the topic of, you don't have to pretend to be a normal person with the same means that others are going through life. There is a big problem that people expect from themselves, that Oh, why am I always late? Oh, why am I always this? Oh, why am I always that? I don't want to use help for that. That would be silly. And that second part is the biggest problem that you have. If you need to have a plush toy to fall asleep in the night, you're going to get a fucking plush toy and you're going to fall asleep. That's what you're doing, right? Like, that's what you're owing yourself. It doesn't matter how ridiculous you look or like whatever it means to you in life in that sense. Whatever helps you to get there is what you need, even if it's easy for someone else, especially for people who cannot really relate to this. And that's often the thing that is going also for PMs, right? Like everybody's giving them advice on how they should do their job. Yo, you don't know how our jobs are, right? Like they're very, very stressful. And that's usually making yourself very isolated and self-judgy, I think.
No, I agree. And I'm like, there's just so many bits. I'm like, parking tickets when you're like, I don't even know how that happened. Like, where did that even go? Like, how is that even possible? And there are so many of these elements that people will go through where they'll not beat themselves up, but they start comparing themselves to other people. And in doing that, like I was just having this conversation with someone that I was working with last week, where they were saying that their biggest source of burnout came from, he was also saying that he had high ADHD and he was comparing himself to someone else who was super organized and was kept beating himself up that he didn't have those skills and therefore didn't think he'd progress his career in the same way. And this person was getting praised for all of those things. And it was causing this sense of friction between him not being aligned with what his actual strengths were. And he's trying to constantly play to things that he just isn't as good at. And as soon as he stopped doing that, as soon as he could just focus on himself and stay in his own lane, then he was so much more successful. And then he started to get the praise for the things that he was really good at. And I think the more that we can come to that level of acceptance of knowing what's important to us, knowing what we want to be good at and knowing what we want to be known for and driving in that direction, then the better we'll feel about what we're doing and the more likely we will be to be successful. And you can get help in those ways where you can say, well, actually, this is a weakness that I want to work on or an area of growth that I could work on. That's okay. And sometimes it's just saying, I'm not good at that thing. Like, we need to get someone else to do that. And like, that can also be really powerful. And again, it comes back to that awareness and that honesty and that transparency. And the more you can bring that into so many elements of doing the PM role, because it can be so varied, it can be so different in different places. But the more you can create those conversations around it, then the more successful you're likely to be.
That is very true. And I think this comes a little bit from the point of we love our processes so much that we have role descriptions, we have this and that, right? It's like we're telling everybody like how they should do their job and so forth. But sometimes a team is better set up if they test its own kind of structures, where maybe in this team, the PM is writing all the PRDs themselves that they have to kind of file in great detail. And in another one, they don't, because it works with the designer that they have and so forth. So, so this is also one of the reasons why I never really look into team rituals specifically of my own teams. I don't care unless something is really dysfunctional, then I may be starting to get a little bit interested. But if things work, I don't care how you're doing it. I really don't. And this is interesting to me because one of the things that I learned in product leadership, I think it was from a course that I visited from Ravi Mehta like 6 or 7 years ago or something. There is this kind of leadership question that you have to ask yourself, like, how do I want to grow people around me? Do I want to play to their strengths or do I want to eradicate their weaknesses? And I think for a long time in our industry, what we did was the latter, right? Like we said that, Evie, sit down. Now we're talking about your 3 big weaknesses and your 3 big strengths, right? Like it was always like this shit sandwich, like this compliment sandwich. Let me give you 2 good reasons. And then in the middle, we're going to say like, Evie, you're constantly late. Like, what's the deal with that, right? Like you need to kind of change that. And I think it was quite transformative for me as well. Like, I think you should also manage yourself in this way, in the sense that play to your strengths and manage your weaknesses just enough, right? So like, do show up to work. It does help, but still focus on your strengths because that is what makes you special. And it applies to so much things as well, like in what we do as product leaders or like even in companies. You're hiring a product for doing something specifically good. And so do product managers as well. You're not hiring someone just because they're overall just like magically making everything great.
Yeah, and the role's so varied that we can't. Like, if you genuinely thought that you could do all elements of the product role to your best ability, like genius, like anyone would want to hire you. But for the most part, we can't do that because there are so many different bits of it to focus on. And we work in multidisciplinary teams where we can leverage different people's strengths, and it doesn't always have to fall to the product person to plug those gaps to do those things. The best teams are the ones that work to everyone's advantages from that point of view. So, and it really is, I think before it was always seen as the product person has to be able to fill all of the gaps. They have to be able to do all of this. They have to be amazing at everything. And here are all the bits you want to work on. And sometimes you just don't care. They're not things you want to work on. And like you say, you can't be absolutely terrible at those things, but you don't need to optimize for it. And I think the other part that you were talking about in terms of that feedback loop that people would get, so many of the product people that I've worked with, they also then don't hear their strengths. They only hear the things that they need to improve. So therefore they go away, putting this extra pressure on themselves, saying, oh, I'm terrible at everything. And like, I have to work on these things. And it's because I'm shit at what I do. And they have this downward spiral of self-confidence that's then layered with some imposter syndrome, where they're feeling like they're never doing enough. And then that doesn't lead to better results either. So I think the more that we can, again, recognize that in people and try to encourage some of the more positive behaviors and tell people where they are doing a great job and tell people what they can build on, then I think, again, we end up creating healthier product teams and healthier product environments.
You know, it's interesting. I did a survey at some point, I think it must have been a couple of years now, where I started to kind of look into what do people think they need to improve on, and what do managers think in general, like, you know, what their line reports should actually improve on. It's very interesting in that people who are working for others, so the ICs and so forth, they say stuff like quantitative analysis, you know, like interviewing skills, that can, you know, all these kind of stuff that you can sort of learn somewhere, right? Like in a university, so to speak, if you want to call it that. I mean, not for PMs, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like it's like kind of like learning a skill. Whereas the managers, almost most of them were coming from a point of frustration where they said, like, you know, it's about reliability. They need to learn how to be reliable. And I've written an article on this. I think I called it How to Get in Trouble in Product or something, where your ability to say no, which this sort of is sometimes, is a nod to the fact that the person who's managing you has absolutely no way in hell to know how much work you have. But for some reason, we always imagine that everybody kind of knows what you're doing. So you can talk about it, or you take responsibility for yourself and build trust with someone else that you know better what's necessary. And a good hack with this that I learned with my mom, by the way, is stop saying why you cannot do something. Just say that you cannot do it. Right? Like it's a very important thing. Like, hey, do you want to come for drinks tomorrow? And then, you know, like the internal movie is like, oh, how am I going to get out of this? No, you're just saying like, no, I can't. That's it. And then you shut up, right? And that's the important thing. You are a human being that has boundaries, but don't make it so hard on yourself by giving reasons all the time, because then you're going to discuss about it, right?
Yeah. And then usually someone finds a way around that. They'll be like, oh, well, we can rearrange blah, blah, blah. And then you'll be free for drinks. And it's like,
there you go.
No, sometimes it's just a no. And again, so much of that comes back to like those people pleasing tendencies of going, oh, well, I need to be able to justify this because it's going to look bad if I say no. Or I need to be able to make sure that this person's not going to be mad at me. So sometimes it's like, for some people, it is as easy as being like, oh, let me just practice saying no and it's going to be okay. For other people, it goes deeper and it's like, okay, well, why are you scared of doing that thing? Can you get to the root cause of where that came from? Was that an experience that happened to you in your childhood? And how can you build the evidence that that's not going to be the case? Which again, sometimes comes from practice. It sometimes comes from going, oh, I listened to this podcast where Leah could do that. And if she can just say no, then maybe I can too. And creating that awareness that like these things are okay.
No, that's very true. And I think people also overestimate how easy it is for someone like me. I mean, everybody tells me that, you know, oh my God, you're so amazing, and saying no. I'm like, this is not easy for me as well, right? Like you always replace your demons with others. And I mean that, right? Like it's not performative. Like that's actually what it is.
Yeah, this goes back to what I was saying at the start, where it's like there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes to make these things quote unquote look easy. But it's like, no, we're always working on ourselves all the time to allow us to perform at the level that you can now perform at.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to let other people down and get them in trouble. That's unfortunately what it is. But if you have limits, you have limits, right? Like you have to feed yourself before you can feed others in this regard. And that's just what it is. I have a question in this regard, but that's maybe a little bit of a spicy one. Like, but if you had to kind of group people who have the most trouble with this kind of thing inside of the product management community, whether it would be age, gender, or also cultural differences, I'm getting to a point, like it's not as spicy as it sounds, but like, are there specific groups that you think like struggle with this the most? Because I definitely have specific stereotypes, at least in my mind, that I think probably hit more than they should.
Yeah, no, great question. One of the things that I found when I was doing my research was that gender isn't a thing in this space, at least in the product world, is that males and females seem to experience it in the same way. And yeah, there's different people that would have different opinions on that. But from what I've seen in terms of the people I work with, there's no difference there. In terms of age groups, the thing that I've noticed is that people that are older who've been through this before and they've found ways to come out of the other side. So it's less likely that they're going through it now. But it's more that people that when you're experiencing it, you're likely to be probably in your like 20s or 30s, or you might have just had a sudden career change and a sudden progression to a level where you're leading teams and you don't know how to handle that. So that seems to be the thing that more people have in common. In terms of anything else, any other backgrounds, again, I would say that I haven't noticed any differences from the people that I've spoken to or worked with. The biggest thing is more like the personality types. And I think that's really hard to define. But there's a lot of people that have come from being high performers their entire life. And when they've done that, they're more likely to run into this challenge than people that have potentially had a slightly more laid back approach, which I think overall you end up going, oh, well, that can be a positive thing. Whereas before, I was definitely one of those people that was like, if you're not pushing yourself to the extreme, you're leaving stuff on the table and you could achieve so much more. So I used to wear that as a badge of honor, but now I can see that there's a better way to look at the world.
I think I agree with this as well. This was also quite interesting to me because everybody tells me that, oh, every woman has an imposter syndrome and no man does. And I think that's absolutely not true. I do think that men talk less about it in general, but I think it's also getting better in this regard. So yeah, I'm not sure. There's something there.
No, and that's the part that I've noticed is actually like, I've worked with so many men in this space. I would say maybe 70% of the people that have joined my coaching have been men. And I think it's because it is a space where they can talk about it when they might not have that elsewhere. Whereas like you say in your scenario, like you might be able to find an accountability partner at work, or you might have friends that you speak to about these things. So maybe the way that people are reaching out to try and get support in this space is also slightly different based on those factors. But from what I've seen, I think it's impacting people all the same.
Yeah, that's true. There's an interesting point, I think, to be made as well about the seniority and kind of job titles as well. And I think I agree with you on the age, because there's a higher likelihood that you kind of learn from your past mistakes, also like how to regulate yourself. So I'll give you that. But I do think there's also a group that has gotten too many promotions too early in their career, and then they're stuck. And I've heard this phrase as well somewhere, that the easiest way to destroy someone's career is to promote them too early. And what that means is, as we advance in position, so you go from junior to mid-level to senior PM, you kind of go out of this mode where it is okay as a junior PM to kind of not perform all the time, right? So we start to kind of increase our own expectations to what a specific role should start to look like. And I've met a lot of senior people, C-levels as well, that absolutely suck in their jobs because they never learned how to regulate themselves. Not because they're eccentric, that's not what I'm talking about, but like they never really learned how to kind of develop a healthy kind of role model. And then this is obviously all trickling down afterwards in a very unhealthy way, because if you're a leader like this that is kind of always working long times and, like exhibiting a behavior that you constantly say like, oh, don't do that, but I'm doing it, you're not really helping your case either.
No, and I think like I had this chat with someone the other day because I think we specifically got this in product because it went from being a career that didn't exist to a career that existed, and then more teams had more product people and people just naturally had to get promoted because they've been doing that job. And you've not necessarily learned how to lead people properly. You've not necessarily learned how to regulate yourself. You've not necessarily learned how to deal with really stressful scenarios, and the way that the whole climate has changed from experiencing COVID and everyone needed to work from home and go online through to going to the point where loads of startups have been failing and loads of people have been made redundant. And these have all been really intense, tricky situations to navigate. And if you're in that space where you haven't got that, in some ways I'll say maturity, or like that emotional maturity to know how to handle yourself or know how to cascade that down to other people, then it can create these really negative impacts. So, and I think this is the other side of it. I think again, the type of people that are tending to reach out for help, or I'm going to say admit that they're feeling this way, are more likely to be a bit more junior in their career. Whereas I think once you've got to that point, even if you don't feel like you're performing, the pressure to stay there and feel like you've got everything under control is also really high. So it's not like it's these people's fault if they're in that scenario. But like you say, the worst thing you can do is potentially promote someone too early when they've not had some of those experiences and learned some of those skills. So yeah, it's definitely something that I think organizations need to consider more now, or need to work out how they can give the right level of support to the people that are now in those positions.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think also like recognize that your job title and the company that you work with is not your universe. It's funny to me as well, like when I'm looking back, like how important it was to me to, like to give off a specific image, and how important this job title was. Like my entire growth plan at some point was like, hey, how do I get a better title? It's like, it's really silly when you're looking back. But I think stepping out of that also helps you, because ironically, if you don't rely on your job, like if you don't have to do it, you're going to be better at it, I feel like. And what that means in turn is that when things are becoming too much and none of these tips that you've just given are working, then maybe, hey, prepare yourself for an exit from that company, like look for new jobs. You don't have to fix a company constantly for making yourself also feel bad. And I think as soon as you do have this, and you also see how you're being appreciated by the market, even though it is a difficult environment right now and nobody wants to apply to jobs, I get that, it still can help you also boost your confidence. If you hear a better salary coming around the corner, like that kind of stuff where you're like, hey, maybe I'm actually underpaid,
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of it is. It's knowing that there's an alternative. And a lot of people need to know that before their confidence keeps getting knocked and they keep wearing themselves into their ground, because it's often that you're not doing a bad job. It's often that actually you're in the wrong environment and you do a better job elsewhere. So yeah, starting to have your eye on what else is out there early if this stuff isn't working for you, and just accepting that we can't control everything. I think so many of us have been in those environments where we've been like, oh, I should fix this and I'm not doing my job well because I'm not able to change these things. And again, with that air of maturity and learning and seeing so many different organizations now, I can turn around and say, well, actually, do you know what? Sometimes that problem's bigger than me. And it's not my place to fix it. It's not my place to solve it. It's my place to do what I can in my area and know what's important to me. But there's other stuff that I have to learn to let go of. And that's a huge learning in itself.
Learning what to let go of. I think that could be a good title for this episode. Evie, we've been going for almost an hour. What are your final words to everybody that is close to burnout or on its way there? And do you want people to contact you, and how should they stay in contact with you?
Perfect. Yeah, I know we've covered a lot and we've bounced around loads of different parts in that episode. So there's so much hopefully that people can take away and go, okay, here's one tip or one thing that I can implement. But yeah, the biggest takeaway is just, if you are starting to feel this way, know that there is stuff that you can change, and make sure you do take the steps to try and change those things, whatever resonated from you in this episode. And if anyone wants to find me, follow me, see what else I talk about, then you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Evie Brockwell. And also send through any questions or any specific scenarios. I've got a bunch of resources that I can share that will help people with this even further.
And your website, eviebrockwell.com, will also be in the show notes. Thank you very much for coming today.
Thanks so much for hosting the conversation.
Yeah, we're done. Look at that. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.